بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى وبعد. Inshallah, today we'll be continuing with our introduction to the study of the Quraan Kareem. And as we start in the introduction, we do a recap of last week, what we discussed, inshallah, before we continue. So last week we delved into the reality that the Quraan Kareem is an experience. It's not simply a book that is read or a recitation that is listened to, but rather it is the uncreated speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by virtue of the fullness of that experience, let alone understanding its translation or interpretation, its mere recital is a means of a person earning immense rewards. And then we delved into the concept and aspect of hikmah, that what is wisdom. That wisdom is to put everything in its due place. And then we went into the deep and philosophical discussion of that the Quraan Kareem has an apparent form. So we mentioned the saying that everything that has an apparent outer form has an inner reality. And we give the example of a person asking us for water. And if you come and you throw water at the person, you say, why are you throwing me water? You asked me for water. He says, no, when a person asks you for water, they expect you to present it in a utensil, in a cup or something like that. So the Quraan Kareem likewise has the outer text that we read, but there is not the limit of the Quraan Kareem. There is a lot of depth in the meaning of the Quraan Kareem. And many ulama and mufassirin and pious people, that when we engage with the Quraan Kareem at that level, then it appears as if we get completely encaptured by that verse. And it's almost as if when we're hearing it or reading it, even though we might have read it many, many times, it is as if we are reading it for that first time. Why? Because our inner condition, our spiritual condition, our iman is on that level where we are able to benefit from that particular verse. And then we discussed the reality that the Quraan Kareem is beyond commandments. That it's not simply a list of do's and don'ts, what is halal, what is haram, and that the reality of the believer's experience is different. And it is this interaction with our finite selves, in all our limitations and our shortcomings and our weaknesses, where we have an experience and an opportunity to experience the beyond, to experience the unseen, to experience something that is uncreated and not of this world. And we also discuss how the Quraan Kareem not only appeals to the intellectual needs of men, but most importantly it relates to the heart and the emotions and the spiritual needs and sustenance that man requires. And then in the ending of last week's session, we discussed that the Quraan Kareem has a lot of depth and many, many layers. That the Quraan Kareem has an outward and an inward, and a limit and a rising place. We said the Quraan Kareem is a zahir, it is an outward, the literal surface level meaning, often the legal or apparent interpretation. And we said how it is a person should refrain from merely looking at the literal and denotation of the verse or the translation that we are looking at, because there is a way, because the Quraan Kareem is speech, and there is a way the Arabic language is spoken. If we simply pick up a literal translation that follows a dictionary, and not done by an experienced person who understands the sciences of Tafsir, how that translation can be misleading. And then we discussed the batin, or the inward dimension of the Quraan Kareem, that it has a hidden spiritual or symbolic meanings that point to deeper realities. And then we understood that the Quraan Kareem is a had, it has limits, that the boundary of a meaning, where interpretation must stop so as not to overstep or misrepresent the text. And that is something a person will learn when they delve into the sciences of Tafsir. And then we had the final one, the matla, or the rising place, the point from which meanings ascend, and opening into higher wisdom or spiritual insights. That often we notice when in the different works of Tafsir, that when the ulama used to write and delve into the literal meanings and going to different hadith narrated on the topic. And then every tafsir has a unique, so inshallah, in our introduction to the sciences of tafsir, we'll come to that aspect where we will discuss the different unique qualities of the many and numerous tafsir that have been written on the Qur'an Kareem itself. And today, inshallah, we'll be continuing with our introduction, and it's got to do with the limits of human speech. So, the Quran being the uncreated word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choosing the form in the medium of speech as a channel and medium of communication with men. This obviously imposes difficulties, as human speech is finite and limited, and we sometimes struggle to express ourselves even when we are talking of very worldly things. So if a person sometimes asks you what happened, a person's vocabulary is limited. Even if a person has a very vast vocabulary, they might struggle to express what the experience actually was. For example, a person went on a journey of Hajj, you say, hey, how was your Hajj? Then that's something else. Or if you ask a small child, how was school? Say it was nice. So there are limitations in our speech. So how can we possibly express anything that has to do with the beyond, with the infinite, with the ghaib, with that which is uncreated? That human speech cracks under the weight. Despite its extraordinary brilliance and versatility, it cannot really carry those things. It cannot really do justice in expressing the meaning, the depth, and the purpose of the Qur'an Kareem. As many times you'll hear scholars saying when they're trying to explain an Arabic verse or word in Arabic, and they'll say like, we cannot translate it into one word, and they have to give like a whole 2-3 line explanation of, for example, the word as-samad. So it's one word in Arabic, but the actual meaning is that being that is totally independent of the entire creation, and that being upon whom the entire creation is totally dependent upon. So that is one explanation given of the word as-samad. So, the ulama generally in our wise tradition, and ours is a way of sobriety and caution, not of extravagance or excessiveness. We say that the deeper meanings of deen are not to be put into words. And we'll find this here. Instead, we can speak in terms of ishara. So, ishara means indications and pointings. And there is a whole genre of ahadith and hundreds of ahadith works called Tafsir bil Ishara, where tafsir is given by a kind of indication, where the exact meaning is not given, but an indication and a pointing towards possible meanings is implied and explained. Not ibara. And ibara now means which is the outward sense, the literal meaning. For example, when we say Fir'aun did this, Iblis did that. So that's a very literal meaning. It cannot have any other possible meanings. So ishara, pointing, in other words, the text pointing into itself and away from the surface and inviting us into that extraordinary and mysterious world. So what the Shaykh is referring to here is again reiterating and reinforcing the point that we were discussing, and that we cannot merely suffice on the surface level and literal meanings of words. That a person he's expressing it very poetically, but in essence what he's saying is that a person cannot merely take a translation of the Qur'an Kareem without having knowledge of the Arabic language, nor the sciences of tafsir, and then say the literal translation of this verse is this, and take it at that face level. That when we look to see what is the meaning of the verse of the Qur'an Kareem, and that we have to have a vast knowledge and understanding of what the actual meaning of the verse is. So it is important for us to remember this today, because there are plenty of our adversaries who think that the Qur'an Kareem is just commandments or bits of doctrine or reports of ancient peoples. The content of the Qur'an Kareem is stories of old people. It's a historical account of what happened in the past. Or your book is merely injunctions, a list of what you should do, what you should not do. And this was the exact response of the Quraysh, the unbelievers, the disbelievers, when they first scoffed at the Prophet ﷺ. And the same words were sent to all the Anbiya ﷺ before as well. وَقَالُوا أَسَاطِيرُ الْأَوَّلِينَ. That these are fables of bygone folk. You're just telling us and informing us about things that happened in the past. But the difference between a mu'min and a disbeliever is that the mu'min has something in his heart which is lit up, which is illuminated when he hears these verses. Why? He listens through the lens of Iman, through the filter of Iman. And this is one reason why, in our experience, the greatest door to Islam for non-Muslims is actually the book of Allah itself. As when people come into Islam, Allah's book has invariably played a significant role in this. So many a times you hear the stories of disbelievers that when they start studying Islam, they have picked up, and that too, a translation of the Qur'an Kareem, not even the actual Arabic. And the experience of the verses and what they read and what they understand, through that alone, this would cause a person to enter into the fold of Islam. And now, inshallah, a very unique explanation of our experience of the Qur'an Kareem. So till now, we spent a lot of time explaining and trying to get the point across of the depth of meaning of the Qur'an Kareem. Because many a times people merely stop at the surface level, and this can easily lead a person astray. So now, with our experience of one is the recital of the words without meaning, without understanding. One is the value attached to reciting it and understanding and varying its interpretation and translation. And now is the listening aspect, because it's speech. So a part of speech is listening. So it's the oral and experiential revelation. So not so much in every case the formal meanings, although they are the most important thing we need to learn, and the inward wisdoms that we need to be aware of. So now there's a whole list of terms that are generally used to describe ballads or rhymes or songs or music for that matter, and how the Qur'an Kareem, by virtue of its rhythmic composition, and something that we overlook many a time. So we are moved when we hear beautiful recitation of the Qur'an Kareem. All of us are moved. That it brings us to tears even though we do not know its meaning. And there is this, not only is the meaning and depth of Qur'an Kareem a miracle, but in terms of its compilation, in terms of its grammar, its syntax, its rhythm, and the flow of the verses, that in of itself, a person had to study it. It's absolutely amazing. So he says the sonorities of the Qur'an Kareem. So sonority is the relative loudness of a speech sound. The timbre or sonority of an instrument or voice is the color, the character or quality of sound it produces. So certain words, for example, الذي يوسوس في يوسوس. So yuwaswisu means that shayateen who whispers. So you see, yuwaswisu. It gives that. So that is now the softness of the particular verse. That's one example. And then we have the syncopations of a verse. So that refers to a disturbance or interruption of the regular flow of rhythm, or a placement of rhythmic stresses of accents where they wouldn't normally occur. So now, if a verse is flowing in a certain way, in all the verses, for example, وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى مَا ضَلَّ صَاحِبُكُمْ وَمَا غَوَى وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى, it's all ending in and then you'll have a change where Allah will bring about a verse and it would be in a position of the rhythmic compilation of the previous verses, but why there is a reason and it has an effect, not only on the effect in meaning, but if a person was listening to it attentively, that would also impact the listener itself. And then he speaks about the sounds, the way in which the resonance. The resonance of a sound now is the quality in a sound of being deep, full, and reverberating. There are different words when listened to, and when you hear it, it has almost a mesmerizing effect in the sound of a particular verse. Like a person can be moving when a Qari is reciting the Qur'an Kareem and is reading in a very melodious way. You almost can move and you'll swing and you'll move with his recitation. Why? Because of this particular, the resonance of the verse. So all of this is an extraordinary, sophisticated oral experience. And that again leads on to even greater depths of appreciation of the value and the unique miracle that is the Qur'an Kareem. So the wise Muslim is the one whose heart as well as his mind are open to the book, who is transformed by carrying the enigmatic, paradoxical phenomenon. He calls it a paradoxical phenomenon. Why? Because uncreated speech being recited and listened to by finite and created beings that are human. So the paradoxical phenomenon in this world, which is infinite as it partakes of the uncreatedness of the divine. And this is one of the points that separates us from the Mu'tazila. So the Mu'tazila said the Quran is created, whilst the Ahlul Sunnah said it is uncreated. And this is the reason why Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahumullah was lashed in his time, the greatest fitna of his time was what? When the Khalifa of the time sided with the Mu'tazilites. The Mu'tazilites said that we believe Ahlul Sunnah that the Quran is the uncreated speech of Allah. It is infinite, it is endless, it has no beginning, it has no end. It is the uncreated speech of Allah. The Mu'tazilites, who inclined towards rational logic, they said no, the Qur'an Kareem is a creation, is the created speech of Allah. And Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he stood and said no, it is the uncreated speech of Allah. And we all know and are aware of the incidents that he was lashed mercilessly for many years, and he flatly refused, and many people came to him telling him, just give in, just cede to them, just agree with him. And he flatly refused, and he never ever gave in. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored him in this world, and he became one of the 4 Imams, and his name is remembered. When you speak about the Qur'an Kareem and the uncreated nature of the Qur'an Kareem, that every Quran lesson would have to give the incident of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and what sacrifices he gave in defending this fundamental belief of the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And by the act of doing what they were saying, that it represents the metaphysical, the ghaib, the beyond. It does not just talk about it, it represents it. So very important, and we'll stop here for today inshallah, that the Qur'an Kareem does not merely speak about the unseen. It does not merely inform us of what has happened in the past. It does not tell us what is going to happen in the future. It does not tell us what is going to happen in the grave, or simply tell us what is going to happen in Jannah, or in Jahannam, or in the Akhirah, on the day of Qiyamah. But it in and of itself is a representation of the metaphysical, of the ghaib, of the beyond, of that which is not from this world. And Shaykh Umar Sulaiman, in his talk today which he was given to the ulama at the Jamiat offices, so he said a very beautiful thing. And he said that today, that what is how in terms of the cause of apostasy, in a person's deen, and a person turning murtad, turning away from Islam, is not because an individual has an issue with Islam, the religion itself, but rather the person has doubts. He has doubts that because of his context or his circumstances or his past experiences, that he has doubts regarding certain aspects. And he said many a times we think that in order to dispel the doubts of this individual and person, that we have to have a philosophical and ideological discussion with him and rationally prove to that person that Islam is true, and Islam is the one religion. But he says that the best way, the most effective way to keep a person and dispel all the doubts that an individual might have is to speak to the individual about the ghaib, about the unseen, to speak to an individual about Jannah, to speak to him about Jahannam, to speak to him about Akhirah, to speak to him about the life that is to come, to speak to him about Barzakh, to speak to him about the arkan, the pillars of Iman. And that is to say, that is why Yaqeen was established to dispel Islamophobia, to dispel and to combat people turning away from Islam. And he says that all of them, his programs that he has, for example, his Ramadan series, is that it's based on the unseen. That one was about Allah loves, it's about speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, learning about the ghaib. And then it was about Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, learning to love the individual who introduced us to Allah and who was the means of us receiving the Qur'an Kareem. And he said he spoke about Jannah. And one was about angels, the unseen, speaking about the angels. And then the next one was about Jannah, speaking about Jannah and the gardens of Jannah. And last year he spoke about Qadr and Taqdeer. In his way he's speaking about predestination. And this year he spoke about Barzakh, the realm that comes after this world and is the intermediary between the life that is to come. So how we need to speak about these aspects of our belief and have an understanding of it, so that the doubt that we have can be dispelled and our faith and Iman can be firmly rooted into our hearts. So inshallah, we will continue next week, and we will conclude the introduction inshallah with some questions that we have, we'll have a group discussion, a halaqa inshallah. It will be more interactive and I won't be doing so much talking, but inshallah we can discuss. You can reference the notes inshallah, because it was interesting, because even yesterday in the program that he had, when he started his talk, he spoke about the divine nature and the infinite nature, the uncreated nature of the Qur'an Kareem. And he referenced our previous discussions where he gave another incident that we spoke about the weight of infinity and the weight of the Kalam of Allah. That how, in another incident, that how Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was on a camel, and how when the wahi was descending, the weight of that was so much that the camel buckled and the camel was forced to sit down. So imagine the strength of the heart of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and then not only bore that message but conveyed it to us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us with the love of the Qur'an Kareem, the love of the word of Allah, the love of Allah himself, and the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Subhanallah, alhamdulillah, subhanallah, alhamdulillah,